Are you ready to embark on a journey of success? To discover your true potential in the untold stories of careers in life sciences? Welcome to PATHFINDER by the Purdue Institute of Inflammation, Immunology and Infectious Disease. With your host, Tommy Soares, discover the untold stories of industry scientists and unveil the secrets to excelling in your career. Thank you for joining us once again, and remember to hit the like button and subscribe to our channel. Welcome, everybody. My name is Tommy Soares. I'm Director of Scientific Strategy and Relations for the Purdue Institute of Inflammation, Immunology and Infectious Disease. And today on Pathfinder, I have the pleasure of welcoming Dr. David Gutstein, who's the Vice President of Strategic Program Direction in Hematology, Translational, and Clinical Sciences at Regeneron Pharmaceuticals, heading program teams addressing bleeding and clotting disorders. David received his Bachelor's of Science and medical degree from Northwestern University. He trained in internal medicine at Harvard's Beth Israel Hospital and in cardiology at Mount Sinai in New York. During his academic career at Mount Sinai and later at NYU, he garnered support from the NIH and the American Heart Association and was honored with the Katz Basic Science Prize of the American Heart Association for his work on molecular and cellular mechanisms of arrhythmias. David has led groups in cardiovascular early development and discovery biology at Merck and Janssen Pharmaceuticals before his current position at Regeneron. To date, he has authored or co-authored over 75 peer-reviewed publications. He maintains an appointment as adjunct professor of medicine at New York University Medical Center. Welcome, David. Thank you so much for talking to us today, telling us a little bit about your journey. I am so thrilled to have this opportunity to speak to a vice president at an actual company that is done so much. And I am so thrilled to hear a little bit about your story and about your journey, how you got to be where you are today. So thanks again for taking time to talk to me.
Thanks, Tommy. You know, I was so excited when you reached out to me. I'm a Big Ten guy as well. And hearing from somebody at Purdue, I jumped on the opportunity. I think this is going to be a great conversation. And, you know, thanks for, you know, I know Northwestern beat #1 Purdue a couple of weeks ago, you know, following on last year, same thing. And, you know, no hard feelings, right?
Yeah, that's right. That's right. We'll leave those battles to the basketball courts, to the football fields. We will leave them out. Today, I hope we can focus on science, and I hope we can focus on what are some of the elements of a scientific career that allow us to progress in maybe even delving deep into our own passions, our own innovations that we have to bring out about ourselves. And your story, I mean, it's wonderful. You've been 3 years at Regeneron now, right? In this year.
Yeah, I've been here for 3 years. It's been a long, strange journey to get here.
Well, tell us a little bit. Tell us a little bit about it. What got you into science in the first place, and medicine? Maybe, you know, what did you always want to be a doctor? Were you always thinking, I got to be a doctor? Or somebody told you in your immediate surroundings, hey, you should be a doctor, or something like that?
Yeah, it was very early in life. My maternal grandfather was a guy who was 5 feet tall, but larger than life. He came over from the old country under, you know, very distressing circumstances, made his way to the US as a refugee. You know, this was very, very long ago. Worked his way through school worked his way into medical school. And that was around the time of the Depression, very challenging life. And when World War II broke out, immediately volunteered for the U.S. Army and served overseas for 4 years as a surgeon in the Army. Really, a hero in every aspect. And I loved and viewed him like a role model. He came back to the States, practiced as a surgeon, and ultimately retired from surgery, but into family practice, which is when I got to know him. And I did know him as a young boy. Um, I remember visiting him in the clinic. I remember watching him with patients. Back then, there was no HIPAA. So a 9-year-old boy could join his grandfather in the exam room. Tragically, when I was young, he passed on. But he influenced me tremendously, and also influenced one of my brothers, one of my cousins, all of whom went into medicine. And so he really was an outsized influence in my career choice. I went early to Northwestern. They had a 6-year medical program, so I was in medical school earlier than I can even remember. It was so long ago, but always thinking of a clinical direction until I started doing a little bit of research in medical school and got a taste of that. I wasn't in the PhD program, but immediately, my eyes were opened to the magic of working in the research lab. And it's really this combination of vision and actually being able to work at the bench at the same time. So you're combining that working with your hands, but yet thinking of the larger picture with your head constantly, and always taking into account all of the data. You make your observations, you test them, your hypotheses, and then you look at the data and you have to critically reevaluate all of your biases, everything that you were thinking, and then go from there. And, immediately this was very attractive to me. And I remember when I was a senior in medical school, and again, I was thinking more in a clinical direction still, but I had a very impactful interaction with the chair of medicine at Northwestern at the time. He was instrumental in some of the basic research characterizing aspergillosis, which was at the time, well, I should say before then, it was really more of an arcane kind of rare fungal infection of lungs. And, it really rose to prominence during the HIV crisis, as well as some other sort of odd diseases of the time. These in immunocompromised patients, of course, became much more common. So anyway, his research already had like some really practical importance. And so I went to talk to him, and it was really more of an exit interview at the end of medical school. But he asked me a very simple question: what direction did I want to head in? And I told him that I really was thinking of clinical medicine, but I enjoyed doing research. And he said to me this one line, which sounds very benign, but for some reason it put me on a real path. He said, you could influence patients one by one in clinical practice and really have an impact on their lives throughout your career. In research, you can influence thousands of patients through what you do. And I don't know what it was, because what he was saying to me was that either way you would have a really rich life, an experience that would make a difference. What I heard was a real validation of thinking about a research career, and that really increased in my head the prominence of a potential research direction. From there, I went to internal medicine training at Beth Israel Hospital in Boston, and I connected with a mentor there Jim Morgan was one of the fathers of heart failure, basic heart failure research, and a real gem of an individual. Just, the kind of person who was so pure of heart and was in it for the right reasons. And again, another tremendous role model. He had characterized some of the initial issues with calcium, intracellular calcium metabolism in heart failure, and why that may be a driver of the pathophysiology, or at least a marker of it. Anyway, his research was fascinating to me, and I ended up doing several months of research in his lab during my residency training. And that really increased my interest in not only research in general, but in cardiovascular physiology and in cardiology. And I applied to cardiology fellowships as a result of that, ultimately matching at Mount Sinai in New York. And there were a number of really influential personalities there as well. One of who I connected with to do research is Andy Marks, who then went on to head cell biology at Columbia. And there were other really important individuals. Valentin Fuster headed the cardiology division. I had a great fellowship director in Rick Shannon, also others. And so all of these were sort of critical in the decision to pursue cardiology and also to go into research within cardiology. I ended up doing a half research, half clinical fellowship spread over about four years. And from there, I assumed a position as junior faculty at Mount Sinai. And as I entered as a junior faculty member, I joined the lab of Glenn Fishman, who studied basic mechanisms of arrhythmia. And and Glenn was my mentor with whom I wrote my KO8. Glenn, again, one of these personalities who's just tremendous role model, really does science in the best way, as all of these individuals, and approaches it with, looking at where is the truth. And, I'm going to challenge any biases out there to get to where the truth is. And that I think is really the essence of it, right? I mean, trying to get past the dogma, trying to have an impact on the field and bring people to see things in a different way, and ultimately for the betterment overall. So from Glenn's tutelage, I branched off to specifically study the role of cell-to-cell conduction in the heart, and how that influences heart function, the rhythm of the heart, and also the development of the heart. And I worked under Glenn at Mount Sinai initially. When he moved to NYU to become chair of cardiology, he turned around and he recruited me to establish my own lab there in his group. And so I obtained independent funding through the NIH there and through the American Heart Association, had my own lab program for several years at NYU, also worked on the clinical side as well, doing non-invasive cardiology. Great experience in the academic side, being a physician investigator. And as I was continuing to study, I started to think of directions in which my research could potentially be clinically applicable. And that led me to some conversations with people in industry. I ended up joining a rotation program at Merck, which consisted of experiences across the development spectrum. So starting from early development and then going into the proof of concept stage. where you develop proof of concept type uh, clinical study platforms, and then also into late stage. In this case, in the cardiovascular sphere, running phase 3 studies and registrational programs. And so that was over the course of 3 years. Got a huge amount of experience in a number of different areas there, not only cardiovascular, but I was involved in metabolism programs, neuroscience programs, infectious disease, and some other disease areas as well. After I finished the rotation program, I went back into early development, where ultimately I became head of cardiovascular early development, responsible for programs at Merck for lipids, arrhythmia, thrombosis, heart failure, pulmonary hypertension. So all of these very wide and rich pipeline at Merck, and they still have a really great program in cardiovascular science there.
Mhm.
And that's been a long-standing tradition at Merck. And did that position maybe 5 years, 4.5, 5 years, before I went back into the discovery labs. So I transitioned back into discovery at Merck and became head of cardiovascular discovery. And I was working in that position under another really important mentor of mine, Mark Arian, who led that group in cardiovascular metabolism at Merck. And he moved to Janssen, recruited me to Janssen to do much the same work there. And I continued to head cardiovascular discovery under him at Janssen for a few more years. That was a really special experience, because when I arrived at Janssen, they had just acquired Actelion, which is a pulmonary hypertension company. And the terms of the agreement were that they were acquiring the clinical and commercial operation, but spinning off the discovery operation at Actelion. And so we saw that as an opportunity, because now we had clinical and commercial operations in pulmonary hypertension, but we sort of had a gap in terms of discovery in pulmonary hypertension. And so, we took it upon ourselves to bring forward a proposal in building a pulmonary hypertension program. And we went ahead and did that, and had some very special people in this group that we brought on. We built it from the ground up, came up with targets, validated targets within this group through a number of assays that we built in the lab. We also built a vivarium and brought in animal models and all the people responsible for that. And we progressed some programs which are currently in the clinic. So that was really exciting and a great accomplishment. At the same time, we had a really active thrombosis group. We also had efforts in heart failure there. From all of these, you've seen progression. On the thrombosis side, they actually have an agreement now with BMS and a phase 3 program. So that has progressed. And the members of the group have all moved on to do great things as well. So that was really exciting. I was there up until, like you said, Tommy, a few years ago, when I transitioned over here into Regeneron to take over as program head for the bleeding and clotting disorder pipeline at Regeneron, in a new group that they were forming, hematology. So this is on the benign hematology side. And one of the really attractive aspects of it is that there are a couple of programs that are gene editing programs using the CRISPR platform in collaboration with another group at Intellia, which is a CRISPR-based company in Boston. Great partnership and really exciting science. And so we're working on platforms in a rare heart disorder called TTR amyloidosis, and then also in hemophilia, of course, bleeding disorder. And then we also have programs in thrombosis here as well. And those are really exciting programs as well. So I think that gives you a flavor for sort of how I got here.
Oh my gosh, absolutely. And what a flavor. Lots of flavors. But so fascinating to see you very focused from early age. Maybe the inspiration from your grandfather, that impact must have been something that kept you moving in that direction. Was it the aspiration to be like him, or did you eventually say, no, when you heard research you can save, you can impact thousands of patients, versus, clinical practice where you might do one-on-one? What was it about it? Was it a combination of everything, him as a role model and you knowing that you wanted to make a difference in people's lives?
So I think it's I could never emulate the kind of career or impact that he had. And I knew this right away when I was 9 years old. But there's an aspect of the romance of it, right? You can see the joy. You could see the satisfaction. You could see that this feeling that he's clearly enjoying the richness of this kind of a life. And the life is where every day you could potentially have impact. Every day you have those interactions with other people, and it really makes a difference. In science, so that's in clinical medicine. In science, we have the same thing. It's the impact factor where you actually, and I'm not talking about publications, I'm talking about when you have that connection to other, maybe, improving people's lives, is separated a bit by a few layers of separation. But I think the impact of that phrase where the chair of medicine at Northwestern was telling me, you can impact thousands through your research, was it clicked in my head that that is an actual thing that does actually pertain when go in. And so that whole romantic idea in my head of being able to be consequential in people's lives in some way. You may not be able to see it face to face, but perhaps you would know, or you can feel it through doing your research. And that's what kind of clicked when I had this conversation. And it is hard because on the day to day, there's so many challenges and so much minutia, and you get lost in the weeds, and you can lose that. But I think that the key is, it's fine. You don't think about it every day. You got to take care of business, but it has to be there in terms of a driver overall. And it is there. And you can have those important interactions. I think in science, it's really with the people that we work with, where you can have that really impactful relationships. And I cited a few of the mentors.
Yeah.
I'm remiss in not citing the people who I worked with, who were my colleagues. And there are very impactful people that I'm still friends with, very close with today. People that not only were my colleagues, but who were in my group reporting to me, who I've also remained close with and have influenced me to a tremendous degree. And other people on the clinical side who I worked with as well. So those connections, those are the kinds of things that really enrich our experience, and I think are so important. And you can't lose sight of that. So I think when you can influence thousands through your research really means that just don't lose sight of the importance of what we do.
Yes, I agreed. And don't lose sight of the importance of the people that you're doing it with too, right? There
Yeah.
was, it was incredible. I was listening recently to somebody saying, if you're going to hire somebody, make sure that you are also somebody that they want to work with as well. And that is such a difficult thing to really absorb because we tend to always want to, get something out of somebody that we work with. That I love the fact that you took this aspiration, inspiration blend and that you balanced both the clinical with the research aspect. Tell us a little bit how difficult that was because I can't imagine that the hours that you have to put in to improve your medical knowledge and practice at the same time as improving and moving, making progress in research, both are huge tasks to undertake. And I've always admired the MD, PhD students. I've always admired the clinical researchers who take on both responsibilities very seriously.
So in terms of balancing clinical and research responsibilities, I'm really conflicted here, to tell you the truth, because yes, it's true. I had in my early career, and actually I did continue doing clinical work even through my tenure at Merck, where I continued to volunteer at NYU in the non-invasive cardiology lab on a regular basis. So I did keep that going, but you know, I think on one hand, I think it's important as a physician investigator to have a good sense of the clinical sphere because it informs your research direction and it gives you a sense for the importance of the relevance of various directions. And so that's very important. The flip side is that it's extremely difficult to balance two careers, one as a clinician and one as a researcher. And honestly, I don't recommend it because I think that, in today, things are so technical and there's so much out there that in order to be effective, you really have to focus and you have to know the breadth of literature supporting what you're doing in order to be effective. So like I said, I'm conflicted on this in terms of if I were giving advice to young scientists coming up. Again, I think there's on one hand an enriching aspect to it, but on the other hand, it's a tremendous challenge to balance the two. So I would just heavily caveat, this issue, and I think, it's something you really have to think about and continually revisit as you develop in your career.
Do you think you leaned more towards the research area, and that allowed you to to concentrate enough and continue making progress?
Undoubtedly. So as my career progressed, I very quickly became majority research, and my clinical skills became more and more circumscribed to the point where I would not even consider myself a practitioner. Um, I was more of an investigator. And, I could help as a faculty member in terms of mentoring and tutoring. But the fact was that very quickly I was learning much more from my fellows that I was offering them on the clinical side. So it's, clinical practice is extremely complicated, very difficult. On the research side, in order to be impactful, it's really, really challenging. So, these are two really, you know, um, difficult career paths, and to try and do both, good luck.
Uh, well, and I really like that, you're honest about it, about, you know, not rosy coding it or making it seem as if it's a walk in the park, because I do see that my gosh, you have to dedicate so many hours a day to be able to keep up with both, right? If you want to keep up, but as you say, focusing and concentrating is probably the way to help you succeed or make progress where you are actually feel like you are making that kind of progress. There are a lot of people that might be ambitious to the extent to dream about it, but I think the reality, as you say, is important to take in. Um, was it seems though that your research techniques and your ability to make progress in your career was also to be in these very key places where there was this combination, medical schools, medical and clinical practices, but that you were also able to provide this complementary research piece that you were developing and that you were growing and helping people. What was it like working with doctors and yet you being more focused on the research? Was there a cultural difference there that you could perceive?
Well, that I think was my ace in the hole,
Mm.
because I went to medical school and I had an MD and I did clinical training, but then I developed into research. So in the research sphere, I could speak in the clinical language and I could draw on those connections. So even though my clinical skills were atrophying over time as I spent more time in the lab, honestly, um, I still was able to interface with the clinical side. I was able to, at conferences, for instance, fully understand and grasp, what was going on in terms of, progress on the clinical side and incorporate those kind of thoughts into our research direction. So that became sort of like my angle. It was a more translational angle that I was pursuing. Where this really became important was when I transitioned. I was at Merck and I was running cardiovascular early development, and I transitioned from there to run cardiovascular development. I mean, discovery.
Discovery, right?
So when I was on the discovery team, and I was heading a group, of 25 superb PhD scientists. I was the only MD, and I didn't have a PhD. And when I came in, I immediately told them, I said up front, okay, in terms of research technique, developing assays, thinking through scientific problems, pursuing scientific method, you guys are going to run circles around me. What I can add to you is going to be complementary. I'm going to be able to add that interface between the clinical world and where we see that it could potentially be translational. And I'm going to be able to help us think through, relevance of our research directions in the clinical sphere. And so this became a complementary relationship. And I think that, you don't have to solve all of the problems, right? As an individual. So this gets back to whether, you're thinking, hey, do I have to do an MD and a PhD? Well, you don't, because there are so many other people around you. And, as we get together with other people, we become much more effective as a group, right? I mean, you can have an expert in clinical medicine here, and you can have an expert in assay development here, and you can have a expert in vivo pharmacology here, and you bring everybody together, and then you have yourself a research program. So I don't have to do that all myself, right? And that's where I think I was able to be successful.
I think it shows too the progression that you went from the different groups and that you've led and the different research areas that you've led as well. It shows that you were able to balance both. But it's incredible how people find a passion that leads them down a certain path, kind of like you, and then you discover something about yourself, maybe your own curiosity, your ability to do and make progress in the lab, and that just leads you down a secondary path. And even though we start focusing deeper in that secondary path, our first path does not leave us behind. And it never, you never lose what you've already experienced. And it seems like you can just keep picking up techniques, picking up knowledge, picking up wonderful mentors and colleagues that can teach you a lot. So we never stop learning, no matter what we do, no matter what direction we go. And that I think is so revealing about your story, is that your demeanor too, David, is somebody that's like open, receptive, teach me something. Let me learn from you. And I really love that. I hope people are listening, not only to what the words you're saying, but how you are saying your approach to how you've taken your career, because it seems like it's very open and receiving also the team, which is so important, very much, I think, in being able to make progress in careers, working with people.
I like where you're going with the theme of learning, because that's what I think is another aspect of sort of the romance of a scientific career. It's that, if you're open to learning throughout your career, it keeps it fresh. And you're constantly reinventing yourself by learning and by challenging. And so, and there's an openness, which is so important to somebody who wants to have a career in science. It's that openness to learning, so that you're constantly expanding your horizons and figuring out the next research direction. But it's also an openness to listening to colleagues, to seeking feedback and input, because there's no way that us as individuals in today's scientific world are going to be impactful as individuals. It's all going to be through the network of understanding and seeking different perspectives, and then coming up with novel directions as a result. So I really like that theme, and something that we as scientists really have to internalize if we're gonna have a career.
Yeah, I agree. Staying curious, right? Staying curious about the people that we're working with and what they also have to teach, because we're sometimes so worried. Like, even in this interview, I'm worried about, oh, what's going to be my question for David, and what am I going to ask, and so on. But many times, all of that goes out the window, because I'm so focused in trying to listen to your story and listen to what you're trying to say, what I can learn from it, so that then I can ask you cogent questions as well. And it's a lot of hard work, I have to say, because we're not always used to doing this type of hard listening, right?
That's right. But there is another aspect, which is that through listening and learning, we can remain relevant. And that's really important, because we're trained, you're a student at Purdue, you're learning, your graduate work, you're developing expertise in a certain methodology, let's say. How long is that method going to be relevant, really? I mean, will it even 5 years? I mean, your career hopefully will be 35 years. So, what happens after 5 years from now? You're going to have a completely different career probably 10 years from now.
Yes.
And how does that happen? There's no way to predict it. And it all happens through like keeping an open mind, listening, learning, and being willing to follow the science where it's the most interesting and most compelling and where you can make the most difference, and also learning new skills, right? Because, you may find yourself 10 years from now practicing a completely different area of science than you're actually in right now.
Absolutely. And you might find yourself in a completely different frame of mind than you were when you first decided this would be the right direction for me. And but I really like what you said, though. When you were talking about the teams, it's very rare that we have Albert Einstein's, walking around and being unique, and the celebrity scientist that maybe was when he was around, even Stephen Hawking, like it takes a village very much to solve these problems that are so complex, whether it's hematology, whether it's arrhythmias and cardiovascular, whether it's infectious disease. There's so many issues that it will take us all really listening to each other and entertaining each other's ideas, right?
Yeah, and Einstein's a great example, right? Because we all know of Einstein's impact in the field of physics, but he stood on the shoulders of others. Isaacson wrote a great biography. I would highly recommend it. And then I don't know if you've seen the recent movie that came out, Oppenheimer, but there's a sort of cameo. Einstein has a cameo in there, and it's just a wonderful scene. And you get a sense. I'm not going to give any spoilers here, but the point is that even the greatest scientific mind that may have ever lived, another generation comes. So you look at that, and it's very humbling. It should be for all of us
That's right.
to just think about, how far we have to go as individuals here to continually challenge ourselves and to remain relevant.
Absolutely, absolutely. And how, even if we think our own lives, could I even name the father of my grandfather? I think it would be difficult. So 100 years and that's it. What kind of an impact are you going to make in this world if it's you and your life, and what you're going to make out of it, right? It's because it will be forgotten in a couple of generations down the line.
Yeah. So I think that brings a really important aspect to it, and this is another thing that I would want to communicate to the students, that we've talked a lot about career. Okay, we've talked a lot about work. Um, but I think that balance is exceedingly important here. And this is what I would encourage the students to think about, that, being focused and working hard is really important, and it's going to help you in your career, and continually learning and challenging yourself. That's great. Do not forget that you have to maintain the balance within yourself. So you have to pay attention to yourself and your needs. You have to, fundamental things: exercise, get enough sleep, that sort of a thing, your health. Okay. If you're not maintaining your health, you're not going to be durable. And you're not going to be able to focus and concentrate and be effective at work. It's just not going to happen. You're gonna have connections with the family, with spouse, parents, siblings, kids, cousins, family, whatever. All of that is exceedingly important. And beyond that, your community and your friends. Okay. And then also, don't understate, the importance of a spirituality aspect to life as well. All of those form a balance around the career. And the reason that I emphasize this is because I've found for myself, at least, that without proper balance, it can be hard to maintain perspective on in the workplace. If you lose that, then you start to lose aspects of judgment in the workplace. And you can see there are examples where people will feel that there's outsized importance to things at the workplace that may not be productive directions to go. With maintaining a certain amount of balance in life, that will help to maintain perspective in the workplace as well. So I think that's really important to keep in mind, that and the fact that overall, just, staying power, durability, and a sense of stability is really important aspects to bring to your career.
I find that so insightful because I've never really heard it explained that way. I've heard it for, longevity, for health, for you to be productive and be successful. But the point that you're making about keeping a healthy perspective is really it's such a key concept about this whole balance thing. Because, people say, oh, you should meditate. Okay. Well, some people meditate, some people pray, some people do a lot of exercise and they meditate or walk and think while they're walking and meditate that way. There's so many different ways, but I like this idea that you're bringing forward, is that it needs to be balanced in order for you to keep a clear perspective as to what is priority and what could potentially not be a good use of our time. I think that's so important, David. I don't think anybody has explained that to me.
Yeah, I think what you're bringing up is an aspect of that balance. So that's, a lot has been made about, how can our personal lives, or how should our personal lives influence our scientific pursuits, our belief systems, that sense of, you may come from different spiritual heritage, and how should that, in my experience, that's very important aspects of life. The spirituality aspect you're bringing up, meditation, prayer, all of that, for me, that's a reminder that that it's a reminder for proper balance, basically. It's not, okay, so it's also a reminder that the spiritual is very different than the scientific. These are almost mutually exclusive in my mind, because you have spiritual pursuits that are not data driven. These are faith based. And then you have, on the other hand, you have science based on empiric data, and then challenging your biases and revisiting those dogmas. So these are almost mutually exclusive, and that's actually a good thing, because it reminds you that there are things outside of the workplace. There are things outside of your career that we have to maintain that perspective and that balance and bring that. Because if you give outsized importance, to things in the workplace, that's going to be reflected in performance. And, you have to be able to step back. You have to be able to, at times consider others, and have that deferential mindset. And it doesn't matter who you are. It doesn't matter what position you are. Always important to, maintain a certain amount of humility and step it back a bit. If we force it too much, you're actually going to undercut the purpose of science, which is, to challenge that dogma, not to blindly, reinforce it. So that's important. Stepping back, looking at things, taking a breath. Really important stuff.
So healthy. I got to tell you, it's awesome advice. David, uh, before we leave, is there anything that I haven't asked you that you wish I would have asked you, or are there any last comments that you would like to make for the people that are watching? This whole interview has been awesome, and I think I could go on for another hour and a half with you.
Well, the one thing you didn't ask me was who I would predict is going to win the NCAAs this year. Of course, is Northwestern.
Of course.
But I'm wishing the best to Purdue. You guys have a great team.
Well, thank you. And you guys have a great team too. I mean, but yes, I really thank you so much for taking time to speak to us so clearly, so honestly. And I gotta tell you, it's been a gem of a conversation for me. I've learned so much, and thank you again for spending this hour with me talking about your journey and your elements of success, which I'm sure we only covered the surface of it. But thanks again.
Thank you, Tommy. This was really fun, and it really flew by.
Yeah, I know. I'm looking at the time. I'm like, oh no, I wish we could have more time, but maybe we'll do a recap. We'll do a reunion in a year's time or something.
All right.
Thank you so much, Dr. David Gutstein, the Vice President, Strategic Program Direction in Translational and Clinical Sciences Hematology at Regeneron Pharmaceutical. Thank you so much for being on our program today. I hope you have a great rest of your day.
Thanks, Tommy.
Thank you for joining us once again, and remember to hit the like button and subscribe to our channel.